So here I am, I'm back again on our 12 days of Christmas. Can you believe we're already up to day 8? So on the 8th day of Christmas, the Beatles gave to me, have you guessed it yet? Maybe not. 8 drummers in 1960. 8 drummers. And really this is over a 3-month period. So the very first drummer they ever play with is Tommy Moore. He was a local drummer, really good. And in my book, Finding the Fourth Beatle, which is the story of the 23 drummers in the story of the Beatles, I've got the only full biography of Tommy. What a great drummer he was. The first time they were due to play as a rock and roll group, as the Silver Beatles, the name they come up with, it was at the Wyvern Club down in Liverpool for the Larry Parnes audition. Tommy Moore was late, so our second drummer comes into the equation, and that's Johnny Hutchinson. Johnny was in a group called Cass and the Casanovas, which later became the Big Three. Because Tommy was late, he sat in, and of course that famous photograph where John, Paul, George and Stuart are putting everything into it, and Johnny could not look more disinterested if he tried. He didn't want to play with this gang he'd never heard of, who weren't proper musicians yet. They weren't even a proper group yet. I was fortunate to get to know Johnny towards the end of his life. Great guy, so many stories. Because he was one of the people who was asked to replace Pete Best in the Beatles in August 1962, and he turned him down. It wasn't for him. Great, great drummer, acknowledged as the best drummer in Liverpool at the time. So that's Tommy, and that's Johnny Hutch. After that, we've got Cliff Roberts. Now, we mentioned him in another video that we did about all the drummers in 1960. He was the drummer with King Size Taylor and the Dominoes. So just after they'd done the audition for Larry Parnes, the Silver Beatles go up to Latham Hall, and they're trying to see if they can audition for Brian Kelly, the local promoter. Tommy Moore, of course, because he'd just turned up for an audition, hadn't got his drums with him. Asked Cliff if he could borrow his, who says no. So on that night only, Cliff Roberts becomes a drummer with the Silver Beatles. So after that, they go off on their tour of Scotland back in Johnny Gentle, which goes really well. But of course, Tommy Moore has this accident, splits his lip, loses teeth. John Lennon tries to make a fool of him, and big surprise, Tommy quits when they get back to Liverpool. So they're going over to play at the Grosvenor Ballroom over in Wallasey, and they take Tommy's kit, but Tommy's refusing to come. John says, "Don't suppose there's a drummer in the audience," thinking he'd get away with it. And one guy gets up, 15 years old, and he plays one song. He said, "I was so bad I walked off again." That guy was Jackie Lomax, who lead singer with the Undertakers, and of course recorded for Apple Records, produced by George Harrison. But that night is when Ronnie the Ted, or Ronnie the Kosh to give him his proper title, he steps up, leader of Teddy Boy Gang, gets behind the drum kit, bashes away all night, says at the end, and he's terrible by the way, says to the lads, "Can I be your new drummer?" Of course they bottle it, they don't know what to say. Little Alan Williams says, "Don't worry, son, if we haven't got a drummer by next week, I'll give you a call." And Alan gets them out of it. So that's Ronnie and Jackie out the way. So next, after that, is when they get this gig to back Janice the stripper at Lord Woodbine and Alan Williams strip club. And it's Paul who plays drums with the Beatles for the very first time. Of course, we know there was a couple of the recordings later on, like the Ballad of John and Yoko, where Paul actually played drums on records. But this is the first time he's sort of acknowledged as drummer with the group, just as a temporary measure. So they do that for about a week. But then Alan Williams manages to help get them another drummer, Norman Chapman. And again, in my book, The Fab 104, I managed to track down Norman's daughter. So the only ever published photos in a Beatles book of Norman, and his full biography are in my book. He was a really, really good drummer, technically very good, fitted in really well. He should have gone to Hamburg with them. But of course, about a week or so before, he gets a letter saying he's been called up to do national service in the army. I know, tough that one, isn't it? So Norman heads off to Africa with the army, and with days to go, the Beatles need a drummer, and they remember, Pete Best. We've seen him play over the Casbah. Paul rings Mona. They offer Pete the chance, and Pete, of course, joins them, does a rehearsal with them. A couple of days later, they're in the van and they're off to Hamburg. So in that short space of time, we've got those 8 drummers. So we've got 8 drummers drumming, 7 Ringo's influences, 6 key black roots, 5 parent spring, 4 Fab 4, 3 bass players, 2 harmonicas, and of course a young lad called George Lee. See you tomorrow.